Hey guys, and welcome to another episode. Today in this video, I'm finally going to be taking care of the rust on the Golf. Now, if you guys remember, I have rust on the bottom side of the fenders, on the rocker panel, and also on the trunk. Now, the one on the trunk isn't too bad, but the biggest problem is down by the rockers. And today, I'm going to be taking care of all of it. So if you look at the front of the car, the only rust that we have is found down here. And we can see that we've got a little bit of rust on the bottom of the entire fender, just at the back side right here. We've got a hole on the bottom of the rocker and a tiny bit of rust on the front side of the door. Now the door is going to be very easy. I'm just going to sand that little part down, spray a little bit of primer and paint on it, and call it a day. But the biggest issue is going to be with the rocker. Now I'll be taking care of that a little bit later, but in the meantime, I'm going to take care of the stuff that I can easily. So what I'm talking about is the fender on this side, on the passenger side, and the trunk. So on the back side of the car, we've got a tiny bit of rust on the bottom part of the door, and for some reason, there's an issue with the handle. Now, I've got no idea what the actual problem with this is because it looks like it's aluminum, but it's actually protruding past this area. So it kind of looks like it's swollen. So I'm going to show you quickly how bad this is. So on the outside, we've got the rust on the bottom side of here. It's starting to lead up into this area, and we've got the door handle to take care of. So if we open this up, oh shit, he's dead. Y'all get up? Okay, get up. If we come up here, we can see that we've got a little bit of rust on the backside, and this is a lot worse than on the outside. And this is somewhat repairable, but check out how bad this is. The metal itself is starting to split. So what I'm going to be doing to take care of that is going to be replacing it with a new one. I've got a new panel right here that I picked up from the scrapyard, and I'm going to be throwing this on the Golf. The passenger side of the car isn't quite as bad as the driver's, but the thing that I noticed is that this was kind of in an accident. You can see that the panel was pushed back, and if we look at the front of the panel, we've got a little impact mark right here. So what that means is that this little fender right here, this area, was pushed that way, caused this to dent in, and I think that's also where this little scrape came from. So I'm pretty sure all of this happened at the same time. But the way that I'm going to take care of this is very easy. The way that I'm going to be fixing this panel is replacing it with a new one. Rust is like cancer. Once you have it, it is almost impossible to get rid of it. So that's why instead of trying to get rid of the rust, fixing it, painting it, priming it, if you can, to make your life easy, get a new replacement panel. And the reason why I say that is because it's very hard to get rid of it. Once you have a little bit of rust on a panel, if you don't completely get rid of it, it's gonna come back. So I went to the wreckers, I picked up a new trunk panel and 2 new fenders for the Golf. It was less than 200 bucks for all 3 of these panels. And the thing is, these things are in a lot better condition as the ones that are on the car. So I've got the trunk panel right here, and it's funny, the door was actually a yellow, but the owner that had this before they sent it to the scrapyard actually repainted it blue. And this is the same blue that I need for my car. So I'm gonna be putting this on the back, and I'm gonna be replacing the 2 fenders that are on the Golf now with the new ones. Now I'll show you something really quick. If we take a look at these ones, these are unpainted, brand new fenders. And it's really sweet. They've got a satin kind of finish to it. And depending on how good it looks, I might not even do anything about it. I might just throw these on the car and call it a day. So if we take a look at our new fender, we're gonna have bolts and everything that feed through the top, the front, the bottom, and even on the inside. We've got bolts that need to go and clip into here to secure the fender onto the car. So with that being said, I need to pop open the hood, remove the bumper, and I'm also gonna take off the wheel to make my life easier when I have to remove the fender liner. Now you don't have to remove the wheel, but it makes it a lot easier because you're gonna have a lot more room to work with. So with the wheel removed from the car, we need to then take the fender out. In order to do that, we need to remove the bolts that are connecting the fender up here onto the car. And they're connected down here along the top side of the fender and on the back side in here. So we're first going to remove the bumper, and in order to do that, we're going to have to open the hood and remove the 7 Torx bolts that are securing the bumper onto the car. Once those Torx bolts are removed, you're going to then go to each fender and remove the 4 Torx bolts that are securing the fender liner onto the bumper. With those removed, you then need to remove the side reflector that has the light attached to it, and then you'll be able to remove the bumper and set it aside. You're then going to need to remove each one of the little Torx bolts that are securing the fender liner into the fender. Now there's going to be about 10 of them inside of there that you're going to need to remove, and then you're going to be able to set the fender liner aside. So we now need to remove this plastic piece right here to expose the bolts that are holding the fender on. And they're also held down by a couple Torx bolts. So just take them out and set them aside. Now if you can see here, we've got 2 of these bolts that are securing the fender up to the car. So we need to remove these along with the other bolts that are just like this around the entire fender. So just remove these with an 8mm wrench. And set these aside. We're gonna need these when we install the new fender back on the car. So there's now 4 bolts at the top of here that we need to remove. Now we need to save these little rubber pieces on here, and these have to be reinstalled on the new fender when we put that back on. But in the meantime, grab your 10mm socket on your impact gun or wrench and remove each one of these bolts. So after we remove these 4 bolts up top here, put 2 of them back in, only hand tight, because we still need to remove some of the bolts on the bottom of the fender, and if we take those out, the fender could potentially just fall down. So get 2 of those bolts and re-thread them back in here. You just need to make sure that the fender isn't gonna be able to just fall out when you take the bolts out underneath. So if we now come into the fender, we're gonna be able to find more bolts down here. Now we've got one of them up here at the top. We're gonna have another one down here. And this is actually an OEM fender. So this like rubber kind of piece that's painted up over top is actually from the manufacturer. So you're gonna have to remove and scrape off the stuff here to get access to the 10mm bolt. With that removed and out of the way, you then need to remove this bolt down here that should be connected to the fender. But because of the rust, there's nothing really attaching it. You can see that you can put your finger right through here, right to this side. So remove these 3 bolts, and then the fender should just come out of the way. Now at this point, the only things that are really holding the fender in is the little amount of like glue stuff on the backside here, the light that's found at the top of the fender, and then those 2 bolts that we reinserted at the top. Now to cut this seam, if it's very sticky or very stuck, you can grab a knife, an X-Acto knife, an Olfa or whatever, come down here and just slice it out of the way. Now last but not least, we need to remove this light. So if you want, you can stick your hand from the back side of the panel and you can push forward on the little clip at the back, and you should be able to unclip this. So I was pushing on this little tab right here, pushing the light that way, and then pulling it out. And then you can remove the light on the back side of it by just pulling, and then get the wire and feed it through the back. So then back at the top of the fender, you're gonna remove those 2 bolts that we just put back in to secure it. Save those, and then you should be able to pull the fender away from the car. And nothing at this point should be interfering with it. Now if you have any cables or anything that are say going to the hood latch or to anything for whatever reason, take it off the fender and you should be in the clear. Oh, what's the stuff on? That, and then there we go. Fender's off. All right guys, so as you can tell here, we've got our new panel right here that's already primered in black, and we've got our old panel at the top. And if you can see, we've got, well obviously the top one's blue, this one isn't painted yet. However, on the new one, there's no rust, which is beautiful. That's exactly what we want. You can see on the old one that we had rust starting down there, and I took a closer look and you've actually got a little bit of rust forming up right there. So it's actually a good thing that we're changing this thing out. We've got a little bit of rust at the front, and on the new one, there's absolutely nothing. Now, if we look on the back side of the panel, you can see that we've got a lot of dirt exposed back there, and you can see that that dirt is what actually started all of this stuff to start to rust. And you can see that we've got the rust that starts all the way down here, and it's moving its way up. We've even got a spider web in there. We've got a couple friends that are living in our panel. So to prevent this from happening on our new panel and preventing all this from rusting, what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna undercoat the entire thing with 3M rubberized undercoating. Now you can use any kind of undercoat you want, but the game plan is to just cover this up and seal it now that it's brand new, so that this does not have the chance of rusting down the road. So before I clean this panel up of any fingerprints or anything else, I'm first gonna remove anything that we don't need. So the stickers, these things can actually stay. They're not gonna be causing any damage or issues down the road. But I'm gonna be removing these little foam pieces on the edges of the panel, and these are only installed for shipping. So get these, throw them aside. And now we got to clean all this up. So I've got right here a microfiber towel and some isopropyl alcohol, and this is going to remove any dirt, any dust, or any fingerprints that we have along here. So just grab the whole thing, wipe it down, and you want to try and make sure that you wipe down every square inch of the panel now, so that when we apply the undercoat on it, it's going to do nothing but stick to the metal. And you can see that it evaporates quite quickly, so this stuff is good. If there's any fingerprints, any dirt, it'll all be removed in this step. And like this stuff, this is what doctors use when they're, visiting you. This is what they use on your knee to decontaminate it and remove any dirt, infections, viruses, blah, blah, blah. You get it. So spray a little bit on the microfiber towel and then wipe down the entire panel. You want to try and focus your area to wherever had rust on the OEM panel. So if you guys remember, the bottom side right here was the spot that started to rust out first. And that's very common for Volkswagens. So I'm going to pay attention and spend a little bit more time down here so that this isn't going to rust out on me, in the matter of no time. So this is the rubberized undercoating that I was talking about. I picked this stuff up from Amazon, and I'll be throwing a link for it in the description box. Now before I'm going to spray this down onto the panel, I first put this inside a bucket of hot water and let it sit there for about 10 minutes. This warmed up the contents of this, which means that the pressure inside of here is going to be higher, and everything is going to atomize a lot better when it comes out of the nozzle. So as soon as you take it out, give it a shake, and then spray down the panel with this rubberized undercoating. So you basically want to use one of these cans for the entire panel, and this is going to make sure that there's enough product on here so that it's thick enough to absorb any impacts, and it's also thick enough to resist rust. So any water or moisture is just going to sit on here, and it's not going to do anything. Now, with that being said, it'll sit on there, it's not going to damage the panel, and this is thick enough to protect it from any rust, from our Canada winters, salt, and anything else that's going to be thrown at this panel. So we're gonna let the panel dry and let the undercoat, sit there for a good half hour. And in the meantime, we're gonna come back to the car and take care of the rust, dirt, grease, and anything while we can in the meantime. So right now, the wheel well is kind of dirty. If you guys remember in the first part of this series, I showed you guys how to degrease your wheel wells. And you guys can do that exact same process to the metal, dirt, grease, and everything else that you have here. Now, so if you want, you can grab some degreaser, water, and a brush, spray all this down and remove all of the dirt and grease at this point. Once that's done, this is a perfect time to undercoat the entire wheel well and protect your car against your winters. Now, if you guys are going to be keeping your car for a long time and you care about it, now is going to be the ideal time to do exactly that. You're going to get that same undercoating that we used for the fender and spray down the entire wheel well along with all of the metal in here. That's going to seal off all of the steel and make sure that it's not going to rust on you. I'm going to focus my time into the rocker panel right now, and as you can tell, there's a decent amount of rust on the rocker. Now you're going to grab a wire wheel, some sandpaper, or any other method to remove as much rust as you can right now. We're going to try and scrape this down to the metal just so that we can start working this back and make it look like the rust has never been there. We're going to need to fill up this hole as well. I'm first going to put a little bit of expanding foam inside the rocker panel, and that's going to allow me to put some fiberglass over top of it when it dries, and it's going to be a foundation for us to build up upon it. So because there's no hole at all, I want to try and fill it up, and that expanding foam is going to do exactly that. You're going to try and fill up the back part first, and then you're going to work your way forward. You might have to do this a couple times just because the foam might be a little soft at first, but you're going to have to build up your layers until it's pretty flat. Now, if you can, you're going to want to try and make it go so it's a little bit past the fender so that we can cut it and shave it down afterwards. So this is about an hour later, and we can tell that the foam now is hard. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut off any excess that's protruding from the panel. So anything like above this is going to get cut, and if you come on the side, anything that's sticking out here is going to get cut as well. So it's going to be basically chopped off and flattened out so that this isn't really an eyesore. So see how you can shave it? That's what we're going to be doing. Just like that. And you keep doing this process until all of this is relatively flat. if you're gonna be working on a big chunk, kind of like this, it's in your best interest to get a blade that's long enough that'll span from one side to the other. So what you can do is you can grab the knife, extend it, and you can shave the entire thing in one shot. So see this? You just saw it back and forth until you cut off enough that you want. So keep cutting. And you're shaving all of this down until this gets very smooth. Alright, so I've got a pretty good shape as to how this is going to be looking, and as you can tell, it's looking a lot better than before. So the hole is getting filled up, and I've got to apply a little bit more of the expanding foam on the inside in there. But yeah, in the meantime, this looks a lot better, so just repeat this process until you're happy with these results. Now, something to note is that the thicker of an area that you're doing, the longer it's going to take for the inside of all this to get hard. Now, if you're doing something small like this, see this, it's firm. It's enough that you can get your knife and then shave off anything. If you saw on the outside, it came off rather easily, but the closer that you get to the inside where it's fresher and not exactly exposed to outside air, the softer it's going to be and the more time it's going to take to cure. Can you see that? Like, see how it's still sticky? Yeah. So I'm gonna let this sit for another half hour and then come back and then take a look at it. Now, if this little area looks familiar, well, there's a reason why. It's because this is the old hatch that was on the Golf. If we step back, we can see that we've got the old panel here with the rust on it. And on the back side of it, it was a lot worse. Oh, and you can even see that the metal is splitting. And it did this for almost the entire bottom leading edge of the panel. So I thought, you know what, how do I take care of this properly? Well, what I did is I replaced it with a used one. Now coming back to here, we've got the old panel and I took out all the internals that we needed. So I got all the wiring, the wiper motor, the wiper, all the panels and everything that I needed, along with the wiring harness that goes through the door and wires everything up. Now I transferred all of that to our new panel. So our new panel here is actually picked up from a junkyard. You can see that the emblems were both taken from it, but look, no rust. We've got a little bit of dirt, but I mean, that's nothing. We can take care of that, no problem. We still have the 3M double-sided tape on the back of here, along with where the word Golf was. But as it stands, this works. So I changed over the entire thing, and look at that. There's a tiny little area right there. See that? I think that was touched up before, but this does look a lot better than the one that we had on here. So I replaced all of the internals and changed over the entire door so that all of this will now work properly. And if you check this out, we can grab the tailgate, close it, and it should work 100%.
Now moving back to the rocker panel, we need to clean this area up so we can spray down a little bit of primer. We're going to be spraying some self-etching primer over the rocker panel and all the area of rust that we have over here. But before we do that, we're going to need to clean it up with a rag and some wax and grease remover. You should be able to pick up a decent amount of dirt in this step, so go over here, take your time and clean this all out before you spray down the primer. So I went ahead and sprayed down the entire area first to cover all the metal and everything. Now not only on the rocker panel, but there was also a spot on the door that was bare metal. So I got the self-etching primer, I sprayed it down over the entire area, I let it dry for 15 minutes, and then I came back and sprayed the entire area down again with a second coat.
Alright, so now comes the fun part. We're going to be laying down a little piece of fiberglass onto this area to cover up and seal this patch. So right now, because this is still kind of soft, we're going to need something hard and firm to replicate this metal. So that's what this is for. So we're going to have to cut a little piece, just big enough to cover up this area, but not too big where, you know, it's unnecessary. So I'm going to get a piece that's going to start up from one side, like that, down into here, and lay down up into the corner. So I only need about this much fiberglass. So at this point, I'm just gonna get that and chop it right there. Now this stuff is very similar to carbon in the fact that it's a fabric and then you're using a little bit of resin to make it hard, but at the same time, this stuff is very light. But again, that's a different topic. That's not exactly for today. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our fiberglass piece, set it up like that, and make sure that it covers up the little area that we need to. So it'll cover up perfectly And because this little edge right here is very corroded, I want to make it so that this is going to be my new line. So it's going to be like that. So I'm going to have to mix up my fiberglass resin, and this is from Bondo. I'll have a link for it in the description. This is what's actually going to be making this fiberglass strong enough to replicate this steel. So right now this is just cloth and I can bend it any way I want. This is what is going to make it hard. So you're going to have to open this up. There's going to be two parts to it. So you're going to have the second part, which is the reactor. This is the hardener that we're going to be mixing into the resin. Now the resin, you're going to have to shake up and pour it into the small cap that's included. So the way that we mix up the resin is very simple. The entire thing in this is going to be mixed in with the entire thing of this. So if you're not going to be using all of the resin, you're not going to be using all of the hardener. It's pretty straightforward. If you use a fifth of this, you use a fifth of this. So I'm just going to be putting a little bit inside this cup that's included. So the way it works is you're going to be pouring that in there and then cut a little hole into the tip of the hardener. So I'm just going to be putting that much in there. And then you're going to get a paintbrush and agitate all of this. So the way it goes down is you're going to be mixing all of this together. You're going to be painting on a tiny bit of the resin onto the panel you're working on. And then after you put that down, you're going to then put the cloth on, and then you're going to basically paint down a little bit more resin on top of it. Now, whatever you do, if you have any extra resin, do not put it back inside of the container because we already added hardener inside of here. So if we put this back in there, it'll make the entire jug go down the drain. It's going to be useless and it's going to harden up.
So with the paintbrush, start putting a little bit of the fiberglass resin onto the area that we're going to be putting the fiberglass onto. So once that's covered with a nice layer, you're then going to grab the fiberglass piece itself, you're going to put it over top of the panel that you're going to be working on, and then you're going to paint on some more of the resin on top of it. Now you want to have a liberal amount just so that the entire thing is going to become firm once this all dries. Now to give this little area some extra reinforcement, I'm going to be putting another piece of fiberglass on the inside part of the rocker panel, and it's just going to make it a little bit more rigid. So just like before, put a little bit of resin down, put the cloth down, and then put some more resin over top of it.
So we need to allow this to dry for a good hour, hour and a half. So with that being said, it's getting kind of late, so I'm going to stop the project now, come back to all of this tomorrow, and then continue on to the next step. Alright guys, so we're back at it, day 2. Now all of this stuff is hard at this point. Now we've got a couple strands over here that are somewhat, not brittle, but you know, they're pliable. You can move them around. So we're going to have to basically trim some of this stuff off so that we can basically make this back to how it was OEM. So you can use either a set of snips, you can use sandpaper. I'm going to be using a Dremel just because it's going to make my life a little bit easier, but I'm going to try and shave off as much of this as I can. Like, I don't really need any of this stuff here. So I'm going to clean this up and make this a little bit nicer.
So I'm just using the Dremel to file off any excess resin and fiberglass that I don't need, just so that it looks a lot cleaner afterwards. So I'm just going to remove any of the strands or anything just to make it perfect, and then after this we're going to clean this up and then continue on to the next step.
Alright, so now that we've got this somewhat cleaned up, we've now got that big hole in here covered up. And we can see that there's no hole anymore. So what we're going to need to do now is we're going to need to make this all smooth, flatten this out. Like right now it's pretty good, but you can see that we've still got a little bit of an indentation in here. So I'm going to be using some body filler, also from Bondo. It's a body repair kit. I'll have a link for this stuff in the description. You guys will be able to pick some of this stuff up and do the exact same thing that I'm doing now. But it's used to make all of this flat. It's like putty, so you basically put it on and you mix it with the hardener, very similar to the fiberglass resin that we used, and it's going to go over the entire thing, and then we're going to sand down any excess that we need.
So now we've got to get our Bondo and mix it all together so we can apply it on the car. So the Bondo is going to be the base, and then we're going to have to put a little bit of hardener inside of it. So open the can of Bondo, spread some on a mixing board, and then grab the hardener that's included and just put a little dab of it, like a little line, all the way down the Bondo. Grab your little applicator and mix it all up until it starts to turn into like a reddy, creamy kind of color. Now once you're at that step, you should then be able to just go ahead and apply it to the car. So you're going to apply it to any of the imperfections and any low spots on the car so that after it dries, we can come in and sand it down and it's all going to be perfect. So apply it on the rocker panel, apply it on the inside, and any part that you think that needs to be leveled. So we let the Bondo dry for about an hour, and it's now all firm to the touch. So we can continue to sand down any of the peaks of the Bondo to level everything out. Now I'm going to be using 220 grit sandpaper to get this done, and you can use hand sandpaper, or if you want you can even throw it on a dual action polisher or an orbital sander or anything. It doesn't really matter what you use, but you just want to make it so that the entire panel is smooth. All the high spots of the Bondo are leveled out with the sandpaper.
So you can see this is now getting pretty smooth, but there's still a little gouge on the bottom of it. So that we've got this part here that's actually firm. See that? We're gonna need to use a little bit more Bondo and fill in that little area. Now it's almost there, but we just need to fill it in a little bit more so it's smooth, just like the rest of the panel. Alrighty guys, so I just spent a couple hours sanding and Bondoing all of this, and it's all smooth, and it looks very good. Now, I'm not gonna lie, it's not 100%, but as it stands, that's a lot better than before. And my main concern was that the rust in this area was so bad that it made a hole, and the hole is covered, and we're all done. So at this point, I'm gonna spray down a little bit of self-etching primer, and then I'm gonna try and replicate this rocker guard effect onto this little section here. So instead of it being like rocker guarded and kind of textury here, and then smooth on this side, I'm gonna try and replicate that right over here.
Now before you use the primer, you have to make sure that the area is clean, and I used the wax and grease remover like we used before. So clean it up, and then spray down the little section 2 coats of the self-etching primer. So the first coat, you're just going to want to try and cover everything up. You're not going to be covering it up 100%, but that's what the second coat is for. So you're going to let the first coat sit and dry for 15 minutes, come back, and then spray it down with a second. Now once that's done, let it dry for an additional 15 minutes, come back, and then we're going to spray down some 3M undercoating.
So my game plan is to have this little area down here just underneath the edge with a little bit of texture, and that's just trying to replicate all of this. So with the rocker guard, or the, what is this? The rubberized undercoating, I'm gonna spray down this little section. And it's funny because it's actually doing a very similar texture as to all this. So when I paint over this, it's gonna look perfect. So not only is this killing 2 birds with 1 stone, it's replicating the look of the side skirt, and it's also protecting all of this area from rust. So see over here, see how you have that texture? And if you come along here, you can see the exact same thing.
So next up is going to be a coat of primer, and you're going to be painting over the entire undercoated section in here. Now this is going to be the foundation for our blue base coat onto the panel. So spray down the first coat and let it dry for 15 minutes. Come back and spray with a second coat and let it sit for an additional 15 minutes. And then finally follow it up with a third and final coat for our primer and let it sit for another 15 minutes. Now next up is going to be spraying down our base coat onto the panel. So right here I have a can of color matched paint for my Volkswagen. Now you can go to your local automotive store and get a custom paint can made up for you. Now I'm going to be spraying over this entire primered area with the paint, and I'm going to let it sit for 15 minutes. Now you're not looking for full coverage after the first coat, so we're going to be building up our layers. So let's start off with the first one. We're going to spray down the entire thing, let it sit for 15 minutes, and then come back and spray it with a second coat. So after that first coat is dried up, you're then going to grab your spray can, give it a good shake, and then spray down the panel again for a second coat. Now as the second coat lays down, you can tell that the color is going to be getting closer and closer to the OEM paint. So you're going to just keep doing this until you get that OEM paint color back. Now for my car, it's going to be 4 total coats to get it very close to the OEM color. So I'm going to let the second coat dry, come back, spray it with a third coat, let it sit for 15 minutes, come back and finally spray it with a 4th coat. Now even after the 4th coat, you can see that the light reflection out of the blended area is a little bit different than the original part, but I'm just going to be polishing it up later, like probably next week, when the paint fully cures and dries, and then at that point, this entire thing is going to look completely uniform. But in the meantime, I'm going to have to spray down some clear coat. So grab a can of clear coat for the car, and if you can, find a 2-part clear coat with a hardener in it. I'll have a link for one in the description box, and then at that point, just spray down the entire panel with 3 or 4 coats, and then let it fully dry. Now that the panel is dry, it's just a matter of putting everything back together before we're done our entire DIY. So now it's time to put our fender back on the car. Now secure it down with the bolts that we removed initially when we were disassembling everything. You're going to have some on the inside of the fender and also on the outside perimeter of it. Put the bracket to secure the bumper back onto the fenders to secure them in, and after that, follow it up with the fender liner and the appropriate Torx bolts that secure that in. Install the side marker on the side of the fender, and don't forget to attach anything that needs to go onto the fender. Grab the bumper and mount it onto the car. Now to secure it in place, you need to grab the 4 torque screws that go through the fender liner into the bumper, along with the bolts that secure it on the front side of the bumper. Now there's going to be 7 Torx bolts that secure it in, and then at that point you can put the side clear reflector on the side of it. Don't forget to tighten your wheels up, torque them down, and then at that point the entire thing is done.
And now after everything is all said and done, we can see that we've got no more rust on the car. We've got a couple black panels on there, but it's no big deal. This car is actually going to be dipped sometime soon, so that is not going to be an issue for me. But the great thing is, there's no rust. Same thing goes for the trunk. I've got the 2 little stickers, or the 3M double-sided tape for both the golf word and the emblem. I'm going to take those off and replace it with another emblem. But the beauty thing is, there's no rust. This is all taken care of, and you can see that this is a lot better and nicer than the old one. Same thing goes for the passenger side. When you come down here, we've got our new fender with no rust on it. And look at that, we've got no hole. Now we can see that it's a little bit different than the OEM fender. You can see that it's slightly different than, say, over here, like in this little section. But it's a lot nicer than how it was. There's no rust hole now that we're looking at this. Now this process was pretty long, so I'll bet any money you guys have some questions for me. Now if you do, throw them down in the comment section below and I'd be happy to help. Again guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace. And check this out. This is where all the rust comes from. Oh, there you go. There's Volkswagen Golf. Weight savings, right there. Yeah, that's good. That's what you want. Oh, yeah. There we go. So if you can scrape off any excess. Nope, just kidding. I waited too long. Yep, I waited too long. Okay. Just kidding. Hey, yeah, legit, 20 seconds. Now that the fenders are black and the headlights are black as well, I think it would look really good if I blacked out the grille and the emblem. That way it would be black from side to side. I'll call it the little black bandit.